The spotlight was a hungry beast, its glare relentless, stripping away everything but the shimmering facade I'd so carefully constructed. I was Sarah, the rising star, the industry's perfect darling. My face smiled from billboards, my songs topped the charts, and every interview was a carefully orchestrated ballet of charm and humility. People saw the vibrant energy, the effortless grace, the laugh that seemed to echo genuine joy. What they didn't see was the suffocating darkness that clung to me when the cameras stopped rolling, the profound exhaustion that settled deep in my bones the moment the stage lights dimmed. Backstage, after a particularly grueling charity gala, the applause still ringing in my ears felt less like adoration and more like a mocking echo. My stylist, a woman whose boundless enthusiasm I often envied, chattered about my flawless performance. "You were divine, Sarah. Absolutely divine," she gushed, pulling a diamond earring from my lobe with practiced ease. I managed a weak smile, my reflection in the dressing room mirror a stranger. Eyes too bright, lips stretched too wide. My therapist called it high-functioning depression, a cruel irony for someone whose career demanded constant, high-octane performance. The truth was, every public appearance was an exhausting battle, a Herculean effort to keep the mask from cracking. I had this gnawing sensation, too, lately, a prickling awareness of an unseen gaze. It wasn't the usual paparazzi swarm, those frantic flashes I'd learned to navigate with practiced indifference. This was different, more persistent, a feeling of being observed, dissected, even in moments I thought were private. It amplified the crushing isolation I already felt, making my apartment feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes, every rustle outside my window a potential intrusion. Meanwhile, Karen, a journalist from a lesser-known but notoriously tenacious online publication, was beginning her assignment. She was 24, a year older than me, with a sharp intellect and a healthy dose of cynicism for the celebrity machine. Karen had a knack for uncovering the unvarnished truth, her articles often laced with a dry wit that peeled back the layers of PR-managed perfection. Her current target, me. Sarah, the woman who seemed to glide through life without a single misstep, whose perfect image was, in Karen's estimation, ripe for dissection. "Find the crack in the veneer, Karen," her editor had said, a glint in his eye. "No one's that perfect. Especially not in this town." Karen started her surveillance from a distance, armed with a long lens and an almost clinical detachment. She studied my public appearances, my carefully curated social media, the effusive praise from my peers. At first, she found nothing but the expected. I was punctual, professional, flawlessly polite. Even my candid moments seemed choreographed. "She's a robot," Karen muttered to herself, adjusting her camera settings. Or a saint. The perceived flawlessness only fueled her determination. There had to be something. Everyone had a secret, a weakness, a human imperfection. She was convinced my polished surface was just begging to be scratched. As Karen observed me from afar, meticulously logging my movements, my outfits, my interactions, she noted the fleeting shadows that crossed my face between smiles, the almost imperceptible sag of my shoulders when I thought no one was looking. There were moments, brief and almost imperceptible, where the light in my eyes seemed to dim, a flicker of something raw and weary beneath the sparkling veneer. She filed them away, curious, but still convinced they were merely the usual exhaustion of a demanding schedule. She saw a successful woman, admired by millions, living a life of apparent glamour. She had no idea the silent scream trapped behind my perfectly composed smile, nor the desperate struggle I waged against the darkness that threatened to consume me. She saw a story, a scoop waiting to happen. I just felt her gaze, a cold, unwelcome addition to the crushing weight of my fabricated life. Karen deepened her surveillance, transitioning from public appearances to my private world, or what she thought was my private world. She found my apartment building, an exclusive, high-rise sanctuary tucked away in a quieter part of the city. Parking her unassuming car a discreet distance away, she watched. Hours blurred into days as she cataloged my comings and goings. My schedule, once a dizzying whirlwind of premieres and studio sessions, began to thin out. Publicists issued vague statements about creative solitude and focusing on new projects. To Karen, it just meant I was becoming more reclusive, harder to catch in the act of being anything but pristine. My apartment, a penthouse with sweeping city views, became my primary refuge. Or perhaps my cage. I found myself canceling more engagements, the mere thought of facing another camera or answering another question feeling like an insurmountable task. My team, sensing my increasing fragility, attributed it to burnout, urging me to take it easy. They didn't understand that easy was a luxury I couldn't afford, that the silence of my apartment was often louder than any cheering crowd. I would stare out at the sprawling city lights, each twinkling point a reminder of the millions of eyes I felt scrutinizing me, even in my absence. My therapist's words echoed in my mind. It's okay to not be okay, Sarah. But was it? Not for the perfect darling. Karen, armed with her telephoto lens, became an expert on the shifting light in my apartment windows. She noted how the lights would often stay on until the early hours, sometimes flickering back on minutes after being extinguished. She saw shadows moving, but rarely caught a clear glimpse of me. My public persona, so meticulously crafted, dissolved behind the thick glass. Karen, however, was persistent. She positioned herself across the street, in a rented room on a higher floor, offering a direct, if distant, view into my living space. One evening, as twilight bled into night, something shifted. I had been particularly hollow that day, the pretense of normalcy shattering into 1,000 pieces. A wave of despair, colder and heavier than usual, had washed over me. I moved through my opulent apartment like a ghost, the silence amplifying the frantic whispers in my head. Karen, observing through her lens, saw me pace, then stop by the large window overlooking the city. My posture was rigid, my shoulders hunched, a stark contrast to the confident sway she'd seen on red carpets. Then I did something that froze Karen in place. I went to a cabinet, retrieved a small, ornate bottle, and placed it on the glass coffee table. My movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. I sat on the plush sofa, my back mostly to the window, but Karen could still make out the slight tremor in my hands as I unscrewed the cap. There was no theatricality, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet, profound despair emanating from my slumped form. Karen felt a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The cold, analytical detachment she'd maintained for weeks evaporated. She zoomed in, her hands surprisingly steady. What she saw wasn't a diva having a tantrum or a celebrity indulging in a vice. It was a raw, naked vulnerability, a human being at the very precipice. The perfect darling, image shattered in that instant, replaced by the terrifying reality of a woman in profound distress, alone, teetering on the edge. The story, the scoop, vanished from Karen's mind, replaced by an urgent, sickening dread. The ethical line between a journalist and a human being wasn't just blurred, it was obliterated. All she saw was a person who needed help, and she was the only one watching. The sight of that small bottle, the quiet, almost resigned slump of my shoulders, hit Karen with the force of a physical blow. Her journalistic instincts, honed for cynicism and exposure, recoiled. This wasn't a scandal, it was a crisis. She knew, with chilling certainty, what she was witnessing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her rented room. There was no time to analyze, no space for ethical deliberation. There was only an immediate, desperate need to act. Karen's mind raced, fueled by adrenaline. Security was tight in my building, but she'd spent weeks observing delivery schedules, service entrances, the almost imperceptible rhythms of the place. She remembered a back entrance, used by caterers and maintenance, sometimes propped open during large events. A long shot, but the only shot. Grabbing her small bag, she ran, leaving her camera discarded on the table. She arrived at my building, breathless, her pulse thrumming. The service entrance, by some stroke of fortune or fate, was indeed ajar, likely from a recent late-night delivery. Slipping past it, she navigated the labyrinthine service corridors, her knowledge of the building layout surprisingly clear in the heightened state of urgency. She found the service elevator, rode it up, and then stealthily made her way to my floor. My apartment door, heavy and imposing, seemed impenetrable. But then she remembered the small, almost invisible key box, meant for an emergency pet sitter, hidden behind a potted plant, a detail she'd observed me use weeks ago. Her hands fumbled, but found it, and moments later, the lock clicked with a soft, ominous finality. I was barely aware of the soft click. The world around me had narrowed to a terrifying pinpoint, the glittering city lights outside, the small, ornate bottle in my hands. A profound, icy numbness had begun to settle over me, dulling the frantic whispers, promising a quiet I craved more than anything. My vision blurred at the edges, my body a leaden weight.
Then a sound.
Not the imagined rustle, but a distinct creak of the floorboards. My head, heavy and disoriented, turned slowly. Standing in my opulent living room, framed by the city lights, was a stranger. Karen stood there, just inside the apartment, her own breath catching. The scene before her was worse than she'd imagined. I was slumped on the sofa, pale, my usually vibrant hair disheveled, my eyes unfocused. The bottle lay beside me, partially empty. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with despair. She had expected to find me near the brink, not already teetering on the precipice. My eyes, wide and unfocused, slowly registered her presence. A flicker of confusion, then terror, ignited in them. My voice, when it came, was a raspy whisper, barely audible. "Who? How did you get in here?" My body tensed, an almost primal instinct to protect my exposed vulnerability. The thought of being discovered like this, exposed and pathetic, was almost as terrifying as the abyss itself. Karen, though startled by the sudden intimacy of the moment, by the raw fragility laid bare before her, kept her composure. Her initial shock quickly gave way to a focused resolve. Her eyes, a striking shade of deep hazel, held a steady, unyielding quality, belying her initial surprise. Her dark hair, usually pulled back for practicality, had escaped its confines during her rush, framing a face that was both serious and unexpectedly soft around the edges. She took a slow, calming breath. She didn't offer an explanation, didn't make excuses. Instead, her gaze dropped to the bottle, then back to my face, a silent acknowledgement of the danger.
She didn't speak.
She just moved quietly, deliberately, taking a single step forward. The space between us, once vast, suddenly felt disturbingly small. The question hung in the air, thick with my terror and the unspoken answer Karen carried. I was too disoriented, too consumed by the creeping numbness, to fully process the intrusion. My mind screamed for explanations, for security, for the facade to reform, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. All I could manage was a weak, involuntary shudder as Karen took that quiet step forward. Karen didn't respond with words, not then. Her gaze remained fixed on me, a deep, unsettling clarity in her hazel eyes. She bypassed the questions, the accusations, the shock. Her focus was entirely on the immediate situation. Without a sound, she knelt beside the coffee table, her movements precise and calm. She reached for the small, ornate bottle, her fingers closing around it. My eyes, still wide with a mix of fear and fading consciousness, tracked her every move. She didn't look at the label, didn't make a judgment. She simply picked it up and, with a quiet, decisive motion, walked into my kitchen and emptied its contents down the sink. The clink of the glass against the porcelain was the loudest sound in the apartment. She returned, equally silently, and placed the now empty bottle in a waste bin. Then, she retrieved a glass from the cupboard and filled it with water, offering it to me without a word. My hand moved as I reached for it, the cool glass a surprising shock against my skin. I took a small sip, the water tasting like life itself, sharp and immediate. The numbness, which had promised oblivion, now receded slightly, leaving behind a cold, raw clarity. My gaze locked onto Karen's. The fear of exposure, the humiliation of being seen in such a state, began to coalesce. You won't tell anyone. I finally managed, the words a desperate plea, barely a whisper. My public image, my career, my entire carefully constructed world flashed before my eyes, threatening to collapse under the weight of this raw, unforgivable truth. The thought of this stranger, this witness, revealing my darkest moment was almost unbearable. Karen met my gaze directly. There was no pity in her eyes, but a steady, unwavering resolve. She simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low, calm, and utterly devoid of judgment. "Not like this," she said, her voice a quiet balm in the chaotic storm of my mind. "That's not why I'm here now." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight of sincerity that momentarily quieted the frantic whispers of shame and panic. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer a dramatic explanation of her presence. She simply stated a truth, one that, in my profound vulnerability, I found myself clutching onto. A strange, unwanted sense of relief washed over me. It was confusing, almost shameful, to feel anything akin to gratitude towards this uninvited stranger who had just witnessed my absolute lowest point. But there it was, a fragile anchor in the terrifying sea of my despair. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't utterly alone with my darkness. This woman, whose face I couldn't quite place, had appeared, a silent sentinel, and in her quiet, unassuming actions, had pulled me back from the edge. My mind was a whirlpool of fear, resentment, and a profound, unsettling gratitude.
Who was she?
Why was she here? And why did her presence, despite everything, feel like a fragile, unwanted salvation? Karen didn't leave. The hours that followed my confrontation with the abyss blurred into a haze for me, punctuated only by her quiet, unwavering presence. She moved around my apartment with an almost disarming efficiency, never intruding, yet always there. She didn't press for conversation or offer platitudes. Instead, she just was. She brought me another glass of water, then quietly ordered some food from a nearby bistro, selecting simple, comforting options. The aroma of warm soup and fresh bread slowly permeated the apartment, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of my despair. While I lay curled on the sofa, a blanket she'd found in a closet draped over me, Karen methodically tidied the living room. She straightened cushions, cleared away the remnants of my earlier breakdown, a discarded tissue, a half-empty teacup, creating a semblance of order amidst the chaos that had consumed me. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, each action a quiet statement of care. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a calm, observant awareness. Her dark hair, still slightly disheveled from her urgent rush, framed a face that was serious, yet held an unexpected gentleness. I watched her, reluctant acceptance settling over me. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was a desperate clinging to the quiet, unwavering calm she exuded, a fragile anchor in the storm that had raged within me. Who was this woman? Her quiet confidence was both disarming and profoundly comforting. I was accustomed to people performing for me, or wanting something from me. Karen just was. Eventually, the food arrived, left discreetly at the door. Karen brought it to me, setting a small tray on the coffee table. "You should eat something," she said, her voice still soft, devoid of command. It was the first proper exchange since she'd emptied the bottle. My voice was hoarse, still shaky, but a fraction stronger. Why are you doing this?" Karen paused, stirring her own soup slowly. She looked up, her hazel eyes meeting mine. "Sometimes," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "people just need someone to see them." The simplicity of her words resonated deep within me, touching a place I thought had long since atrophied. To be seen, truly seen, without the glare of the spotlight or the filter of expectation, was a terrifying and strangely healing prospect. A few hours later, after the initial shock had somewhat receded and a fragile calm had settled, Karen stepped out, mentioning she needed to get some fresh air. I watched her go, a flicker of apprehension that she might not return. But she did a short while later, carrying a small bag of groceries, some fruit, a new herbal tea blend, things I hadn't realized I needed. As she was letting herself back in, she paused, her head tilting almost imperceptibly. Her journalistic instincts, though now repurposed, were still razor-sharp. She'd caught a glimpse of movement across the street, a familiar glint of a telephoto lens from a parked car. A paparazzi. My stomach lurched with a fresh wave of fear. The thought of them capturing her presence here, of fabricating some scandalous story, sent a chill through me. Karen, however, didn't panic. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Without a word, she subtly changed her route into the building, using a different entrance she'd observed earlier, ensuring the photographer couldn't get a clear shot of her face or any confirmation of her presence with me. She then took a moment, using her knowledge of common journalistic tactics, to position her car in a way that obscured the paparazzo's line of sight into my apartment windows for a good stretch of time. It was a small, almost imperceptible act, but when she returned, her gaze met mine, a silent assurance passing between us. She had protected my privacy, not for a story, but for me. It was an act of silent guardianship, a small, tangible gesture that began to deepen the nascent, reluctant trust that was forming between us. I still didn't know her name, or why she, a stranger, was here. But in that moment, she was my sentinel, and the weight of her presence, once an intrusion, now felt like a fragile, comforting shield. Karen began to check in. Initially, it was just a quiet knock at the door, a shared meal, a book she thought I might enjoy. She never overstayed, never pushed, always respectful of the fragile space she'd entered. Our conversations were initially sparse, punctuated by comfortable silences that, to my surprise, became less oppressive and more comforting than any forced conversation. She had a way of just being, her presence a grounding force against the often chaotic whispers in my mind. She'd bring over simple ingredients, and together, in a strange, almost ritualistic dance, we'd prepare meals in my sprawling, usually pristine kitchen. She cooked with a quiet competence, her movements fluid and unpretentious. I, who rarely cooked anything more complex than toast, found myself watching her, occasionally even offering a hesitant hand with chopping vegetables. These were the moments where the masks, mine and hers, seemed to naturally slip. She wasn't just observing me anymore. She was with me. Slowly, hesitantly, I began to share fragments of my life. Not the curated anecdotes for interviews, but the raw, unedited truths. The crushing loneliness that fame had brought, the relentless pressure to maintain an impossible image, the terror of not being enough. I spoke of the exhaustion, the feeling of being a puppet on a string, the profound sense of disconnection from my own self. My voice was often soft, sometimes choked with emotion, but Karen listened with an unwavering intensity, her hazel eyes reflecting a deep understanding that surprised me. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick fixes. She just absorbed, her presence a silent testament to her empathy. One evening, as soft jazz played low in the background, a rare, gentle rain pattering against the penthouse windows, I found myself recounting a particularly painful incident from my childhood, a moment of deep insecurity dismissed by an adult. Karen simply reached across the coffee table, offering me a mug of the herbal tea she'd brewed, its warmth seeping into my cold hands. "It's hard, carrying all that," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an exclamation, not a dramatic statement, but a quiet acknowledgement that made something shift inside me. She saw the weight, not just the surface. Karen, in turn, shared glimpses of her own world. Her family, her passion for uncovering stories that mattered, her frustration with the superficiality of some media. She offered insights without judgment, having seen both the fabricated public persona and my raw vulnerability firsthand. She understood the artifice, but also the human cost. "It's easy to forget," she said once, staring out at the city lights, "that behind every headline, there's just a person." The foreign sensation of being truly seen, understood, by someone who was once an adversary, began to settle. It was unsettling, yet profoundly comforting. A slow, hesitant thaw started within me, like ice melting under a gentle sun. I found myself looking forward to her quiet visits, to the shared silences and the rare, soft exchanges. Her presence, once a source of acute terror, was now becoming a strange kind of sanctuary. She had come to expose a crack, but instead, she found a wound, and in her unassuming way, she began to help it heal. I still didn't fully comprehend the shift, or the subtle currents that were now beginning to flow between us, but I knew, deep in my bones, that something profound was changing. My path to healing was anything but linear. There were days of retreat, moments when the familiar shadows would creep back in, threatening to overwhelm me. I'd pull away, cancel plans, the sheer effort of functioning feeling impossible. But Karen remained a steady, comforting presence, a quiet anchor in the stormy waters. She never pressured me, never pushed me faster than I was ready to go. On my darkest days, she would simply appear, sometimes with a quiet meal, sometimes just to sit in silence, her presence a silent, unwavering reassurance that I wasn't alone. Her role, unspoken yet ever-present, extended beyond my apartment walls. My team began to notice a subtle shift in my public appearances. I was still reserved, but there was a new, quiet strength. Karen, with her journalist's understanding of the media landscape, subtly shielded me from intrusions. She'd observe upcoming events, gently suggest different routes, or discreetly stand near me in crowded rooms, her presence a silent deterrent to overly aggressive photographers. She helped me navigate public appearances with a newfound understanding of my emotional fragility, offering quiet counsel on how to manage the relentless demands without completely breaking. A delicate balance formed between us. We navigated the emotional tightrope of our evolving connection, acutely aware of the unspoken feelings growing between us. It was a bond forged in vulnerability and quiet care, deeper and more intricate than anything I had ever known. We spent evenings talking about everything and nothing: art, politics, the quiet observations of life, sometimes even the absurdities of fame. My own voice, once so guarded, now found a freedom in her company. I found myself increasingly aware of her. The way the light caught the subtle waves in her dark hair, the focused intensity in her hazel eyes when she was listening, the gentle curve of her lips when she offered a rare, soft smile. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, or friendship. There was a confusing mix of affection, a deep sense of security, and a new, unsettling current of attraction that pulsed beneath the surface. Was it simply the relief of finding solace, or something deeper, more profound, stirring within me? The question lingered, an almost palpable presence in the quiet moments we shared. One evening, after a particularly draining photo shoot where I'd had to project an almost manic cheerfulness, I returned to my apartment feeling utterly depleted. Karen was there, having come to check on me. I sank onto the sofa, my head in my hands, the effort of maintaining my public face too much to bear. Karen sat beside me, not touching, just a warm, silent presence. I felt her gaze not scrutinizing, but understanding. Then, a subtle gesture. I reached out, almost unconsciously, my hand finding hers on the cushion between us. Her fingers intertwined with mine, a simple, unexpected gesture that sent a quiet warmth through my entire being. It wasn't a sudden spark, but a gentle, steady heat. Our eyes met, a profound understanding passing between us, a shared breath held in the space between two worlds. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet hum of our intertwined hands, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate, powerful connection growing between us. The silent touch, our intertwined hands, had subtly shifted the ground beneath us. The air between us, always charged with unspoken understanding, now crackled with a new, hesitant energy. It was a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying, a confirmation of feelings I had been too afraid to name, even to myself. The days that followed were marked by this unspoken awareness, a delicate dance around a truth that was rapidly becoming undeniable. One evening, after a particularly challenging day of public scrutiny, a magazine cover story that dissected my every move and speculated endlessly on my personal life, I found myself completely overwhelmed. The constant invasion felt suffocating. I retreated to the quiet of my apartment, the familiar dark thoughts threatening to resurface. Karen was already there, a calming presence, having anticipated my distress. I sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching a mug of tea, my hands cold despite the warmth radiating from the ceramic.
My voice was tight, strained.
"It never stops," I murmured, staring blankly at the cityscape outside. "They pick apart everything. Every smile, every silence." The constant performance, the relentless judgment, felt like an open wound. Karen sat beside me, closer than usual, her quiet presence a balm. She didn't offer advice or try to rationalize. She simply listened, her gaze steady, her empathy a palpable force. There was a moment, a pause in my halting words, when I truly felt seen, stripped bare of all pretense, and accepted. The vulnerability I felt was immense, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like a shared space. My gaze drifted from the window to Karen's face. The soft lamplight illuminated the serious line of her jaw, the gentle curve of her lips. Her hazel eyes, usually so observant, held a profound softness now, reflecting an understanding that words couldn't convey. In that moment, something shifted within me, a deep internal current pulling me forward. The weight of all the unspoken words, all the silent affection and burgeoning attraction, became too heavy to bear alone. I leaned in, a hesitant, questioning movement, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. The distance between us closed, slowly, deliberately. Our lips met, a soft, brief touch, quiet, understated, yet charged with the weight of all we'd shared. It wasn't a display of passion, but a gentle acknowledgement of trust, of vulnerability, of a connection neither of us had expected. We drew back, a shared breath hanging in the silence, our eyes meeting. There was shyness there, and a quiet certainty, a sense that something fundamental had changed. The world, for me, had irrevocably shifted. The undeniable truth of my feelings for Karen, once a confusing undercurrent, now surged to the surface, a breathtaking realization that both exhilarated and frightened me. This quiet, observant journalist, who had once sought to expose my flaws, had instead become the one person who saw me whole, and in doing so, had awakened a part of me I hadn't known existed. The fear was still there, a whisper of the unknown, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, undeniable hope. Following that quiet kiss, our relationship subtly transformed. The unspoken became a language of knowing glances, of subtle gestures, of a comfortable proximity that had not existed before. Words were still scarce between us, but actions and shared understandings spoke volumes. The air in my apartment, once heavy with my silent despair, now felt lighter, infused with a soft warmth I hadn't thought possible. Karen's presence became not just a comfort, but a necessity. I found myself leaning on her not only for emotional support, but for the simple joys of companionship. We'd spend mornings over coffee, sharing mundane observations, or evenings lost in hushed conversations about dreams and fears, the vast city lights twinkling outside our private world. I, who had always felt isolated even in a crowd, began to experience the profound solace of true connection. She brought a quiet sense of order to my chaotic inner world, a steady hand that helped me navigate the often overwhelming demands of my public life. Karen, too, seemed to find something profound in our connection. Her cynical detachment, once a defining trait, softened around the edges. I saw her laugh more freely, her eyes sparkling with an animation that was new. She found a sense of purpose and a profound connection she had known she was missing, a depth of experience that transcended the surface-level narratives of her journalistic past. My recovery, once a solitary and arduous climb, now felt like a shared journey. There were still difficult days, but Karen's steadfast presence made them manageable. She became my anchor, my quiet confidant. One evening, after a particularly trying press conference where I'd felt myself almost unraveling under the barrage of invasive questions, I returned home utterly drained. Karen was there, waiting. As I began to recount the difficult interaction, my voice trembling with fatigue, she simply opened her arms. I moved into her embrace, a quiet comfort settling over me. It was a moment of deep mutual solace, my head resting against her shoulder, her arms wrapping around me in a protective hold. Our bodies settled into a natural closeness that felt like coming home, a safe harbor from the storm outside. The world beyond our small bubble seemed to fade, leaving only the soft hum of our shared space, the warmth of her touch, the quiet beat of her heart against mine. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the profound, steady truth of simply being held, being understood, being cherished in the most fundamental way. My transformation became visible, even to others. The genuine light in my eyes, the slight upturn of my lips in moments of quiet contentment, the more grounded presence I exuded in public. My radiant smile now held a genuine, authentic light, no longer a performance. I found a more authentic voice in my public life, choosing projects that resonated with me, no longer just chasing the next big hit. Karen's path evolved alongside mine. Her focus shifted from chasing scandals to pursuing stories with depth and humanity. There were hints of a different career trajectory, perhaps one that allowed her to explore narratives with more nuance and impact, a direction that resonated with her newfound understanding of the human condition. Our love, quiet and deep, had become a sanctuary, a shared space where we could both shed our masks and simply be. Our love, quiet and profound, continued to deepen, resilient against the glittering, often harsh, backdrop of my public life. It wasn't a love story for the tabloids, but a deeply personal, fiercely protected connection that thrived in the quiet corners of our shared existence. We learned to navigate the unique challenges of our disparate worlds, my fame, her journalistic past, the ever-present scrutiny, but we approached them as a united force, a silent understanding passing between us that spoke louder than any words. I continued my career, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a far firmer grip on my own well-being. The once crushing demands of the industry still existed, but they no longer held the power to shatter me. Karen's steadfast presence had become my unwavering ground, an anchor that kept me from drifting back into the depths. I learned to draw boundaries, to say no, to prioritize my mental health above the relentless pursuit of perfection. My radiant smile now truly reflected an inner contentment, no longer a practiced facade. The whispers of depression still surfaced sometimes, but they were now just whispers, not shouts, and I had Karen, my quiet sentinel, to help me acknowledge them without succumbing. Karen, too, found a deeper sense of fulfillment. She stepped away from the aggressive pursuit of celebrity gossip, finding her voice in stories that championed overlooked voices and explored the complexities of the human spirit. Her articles gained a new depth, a compassionate insight that resonated deeply with readers. She thrived in her new focus, her sharp intellect now guided by a profound empathy that our shared journey had undeniably forged. She no longer sought cracks in veneers, but rather the genuine light that shone through them. We learned to cherish the small moments, a shared laugh over a silly movie, a quiet walk through a city park, the comfort of her hand finding mine under a restaurant table. These were the building blocks of our life together, simple yet profound. Our love wasn't about fireworks. It was about the steady, comforting glow of two souls finding profound solace and understanding in each other. One quiet afternoon, we sat on my balcony, overlooking the sprawling city. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a gentle farewell to the day. My head rested against Karen's shoulder, her arm a warm, solid presence around me. The silence between us was rich, full of years of shared vulnerabilities, quiet triumphs, and unwavering support. "You know," I murmured, my voice soft, "you came to find a story. And you did." I paused, a small smile playing on my lips. "Just not the one you expected." Karen leaned her head against mine, her fingers gently tracing the lines of my palm. "The best stories," she replied, her voice a low, melodic hum, "are rarely the ones you go looking for. They're the ones that find you and change you." I closed my eyes, a profound sense of peace settling over me. Karen, initially an adversary, a threat to everything I had built, had become my salvation. Not just from the brink, but into a life truly lived, a life rich with authenticity and a love I had never dared to dream of. She had seen beyond the perfect darling, beyond the illness, to the core of who I was, and she had chosen to stay. The profound, lasting impact on my identity and worldview was undeniable. I was no longer just Sarah, the star. I was Sarah, a woman who had found healing, love, and a quiet, enduring strength in the most unexpected place. We stood together, facing the deepening twilight, a unified force against the vast, unknown horizon. The future held its own uncertainties, its own challenges, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. With Karen by my side, I knew we would meet whatever came next together. Our journey was far from over. It was just beginning, and the quiet promise of our unfolding story stretched out before us, vast and full of light.